Late one night in mid-February, a taxi pulled up outside a motel in Gangbuk District, Seoul. A young woman stepped out of a room carrying nothing but her phone. She hailed the taxi. The driver would later remember very clearly the first thing she said to him. She told him to drive fast, to get away as soon as possible. Her destination was only 3 kilometers away, a distance short enough that rushing made no sense. The driver asked no further questions. All he remembered was her face, and that unexplained urgency. 19 hours later, the door to the room she'd just left was opened again. Inside, people found something no one at that motel had ever imagined. Not long before that, another man had also stepped into a similar room with her and never walked back out. This wasn't the first time, and as of this video's release, it still isn't the end of the story. We tend to believe that once someone is under police scrutiny, once they know they're the prime suspect in a suspicious death, survival instinct would make them pull back, lie low, and wait quietly. But what happens if, right in the middle of waiting for their own interrogation, that person keeps going on dates, keeps searching for a new target, and strikes again? In early 2026, a string of mysterious deaths at motels in Seoul confronted South Korean police with a suspect not yet 20 years old, who as of now has been linked to 6 victims, 2 of whom never woke up again. Who is this person? What could drive someone this young to act so coldly and so calculatingly? And why, even after being placed under surveillance, did this person never stop? Let's go back to the afternoon of February 10th, 2026, at a budget motel tucked deep in a small alley in Gangbuk District, Seoul, where everything first began. Around 5:30 that afternoon, the motel's front desk staff noticed something unusual. Checkout time had long passed, yet one room still hadn't been vacated. Staff called the room several times with no answer. Someone went up to knock, and again, there was no response. At first, they simply assumed the guest had left her. The door was opened for routine cleaning, but the guest was still lying right there on the bed. Staff called out that checkout time had passed. The man showed no reaction at all, as if he hadn't heard anything. Moving closer to take a look, the staff member suddenly froze. The man's face was pale, his lips a bluish purple, and around his mouth and nose was a crust of... Police arrived quickly at the scene and confirmed the 27-year-old man was dead. Aside from the fluid around his mouth and nose, there were no wounds or signs of struggle. The room remained as tidy as ever. The possibility of a violent crime was almost ruled out from the very start. The initial assessment leaned toward poisoning. And yet, when searching the entire room, police found only a half-eaten box of fried chicken and a few... The trash was also searched thoroughly, but no medication packaging or pill blister packs were found to reconstruct what had happened before the victim died. Police pulled all the security footage from inside and outside the motel. The footage showed that the night before, around 8 in the evening on February 9th, this man had entered the motel together with a young woman. The two held hands, appearing quite affectionate, like a couple on a date. But only about 2 hours after entering the room, around 10 at night, the woman walked out alone, carrying a black plastic bag. Police speculated the bag might have contained items belonging to the man, possibly valuables, possibly tools used in the crime. The woman hailed a taxi right outside the motel's gate and left the scene. 19 hours later, the body was discovered. Police found that night's taxi driver. He recounted that as soon as she got into the car, the first thing his passenger said was to drive fast, to get away. But her destination was only 3 kilometers away. A trip short enough that there was no need for such urgency, a detail the driver never forgot. That 27-year-old man, born in 1998, was the final victim. Someone public records don't name in full, referring to him only by his age and his role in the case. Throughout the entire released case file, most victims of this case are never referred to by name at all, only recorded by age and by a designation code. Meanwhile, the name that appeared repeatedly across headlines for months afterward was that of the person suspected of... That's an injustice, and it's exactly what this video is trying not to repeat. Forensics later determined the 27-year-old man's cause of death was drug poisoning combined with alcohol, leading to acute respiratory failure. This was a person who'd had an evening date like anyone else, who had bought food and drinks with someone he'd just met at a convenience store before heading into the room, who had texted friends about his plans for the evening. with no idea that just hours later, his 27 years of life would come to. This channel has one rule: the victim is who deserves to be remembered by name. So before we go on, I want you to remember this 27-year-old man, the 29-year-old man who was the first victim to die nearly 2 weeks earlier, and the 4 other men who survived but went through hours of unexplained unconsciousness. They are the real people here, not just a case. Before returning to the afternoon, the body was found. Let's step back exactly 24 hours to understand precisely what happened during the stretch of time police would later need. Around 8 in the evening on February 9th, the 27-year-old man left home, with no idea this would be the last evening of his. About 9 hours left. Hours earlier, he'd chatted with a close friend by text, saying he had a date that night with a woman he'd met online, and that she had proactively suggested booking a room to order food and watch a movie together, instead of sitting at a restaurant as originally planned. About 7 hours left. Around 8 in the evening, security footage from a nearby convenience store captured the 2 of them together, buying some drinks and snacks, before walking toward the alley where the motel was. About 6 hours left. At exactly 8:40 in the evening, the motel's gate camera captured the moment the 2 of them entered together, hand in hand, with no. About 2 hours left. His close friend, the one texting back and forth with him that evening, recounted that around 9 o'clock he'd sent a short message saying the food was about to arrive, sounding cheerful with no sign of worry at all. That was the last message his friend still had from him. At 10 at night, exactly as the camera showed, the woman with him walked out of the room alone. About 19 hours left until everything would be discovered. From the moment that taxi drove off until the motel staff opened the door the following afternoon, no one knew what had actually happened inside that room. Those 19 silent hours were exactly the gap the entire task force would later have to pour their. During that stretch of time, at least 3 other people had crossed paths with or had direct contact with the woman who left the motel that night, though none of them at the time knew who they were actually. A taxi driver still remembered her hurried face during that short 3-kilometer ride. A convenience store clerk had sold her dozens of hangover recovery drinks just weeks earlier, with no idea what that stock would be used for. And a 30-year-old man who had dated her not long before remained in contact with her right up until the day of her final attack, completely unaware he had narrowly escaped death for a very small reason. None of them, on the night of February 9th, could have imagined that the woman they just interacted with was carrying with her a string of suspicious deaths stretching back months. But to understand why the task force immediately suspected this wasn't an isolated incident, we need to go back even further, all the way to late October 2025, when the first signs of this chain of events began to appear, though no one recognized the connection between them in late October 2025, at a restaurant in Seoul District, Seoul, a man in his 20s having a meal with a woman he'd just met suddenly collapsed right at the table after he was rushed to the hospital, reflexes slowed, unable to move on his own. The incident was treated at the time as an unusual case of alcohol intoxication, and an extremely faint spark, one no one had yet noticed, but it was the very first link in the entire chain. This was a clue only discovered later, when police traced back through the suspect's entire contact history after her arrest. This showed that this woman's behavior had begun very early on, much earlier than what the public initially came to know. By mid-December 2025, in a parking lot near a bakery in Namyangju City, Gyeonggi Province, a similar story played out again, this time with a man she'd been seriously dating for about a month. After a small argument, she handed him an energy drink, saying it would help with his fatigue after a full day of driving. And as a way of, he drank the whole bottle without a hint of suspicion. Just about 20 minutes later, he collapsed right there at the shop, losing consciousness. She called his family, and he was rushed to the hospital shortly after. It took 2 full days to wake. Upon waking, he pressed her about what she'd put in that bottle, but never got a clear answer. The relationship between the two ended right after that. By late January 2026, he officially filed a report against her for causing. This was the first time her name appeared in police records, though at the time no one yet grasped the true scale of what was unfolding. Also around this time, in early January 2026 at a motel in Jongno District, Seoul, a man in his 20s became a victim in the same manner, and ironically, he had to endure this not once, but the first time, after drinking the hangover drink she gave him, he remained unconscious in the room for nearly 2 full days, forcing the motel to demand an extra fee for the overstay, which escalated into a dispute. A few days later, when the two met again, she offered him a similar drink. This time he refused, but she practically forced him. He fell unconscious once again. Around the same time, mid to late January, at a karaoke bar in So-yeong, Gangbuk District, a man in his 30s went through a similar situation after drinking a hangover drink she'd brought along while the group was drinking together. He lost consciousness right after, and upon waking, his body showed abnormal signs severe enough that This made investigators, when they later pieced together all these scattered incidents, shudder at one realization. Throughout the period from late October 2025 to early February 2026, at least 4 men had gone through suspicious comas after contact with the same woman, and fortunately, all 4. But that luck wouldn't last forever. Just 10 days after the man in Namyangju officially filed his report, on January 28, 2026, at another motel also in So-yeong Gangbuk District, staff discovered a 29-year-old man dead in his room, with no wounds on his body at all. Police arrived at this scene and quickly traced the last person to have contact with the victim before he died. It was exactly the same name that had appeared in that report 10 days earlier. An unexpected spark had just flickered amid a string of seemingly disconnected incidents. And this time, it was strong. On February 6, 2026, the investigator handling the case called and asked her to come to the police station to clarify a few matters, since there wasn't yet enough concrete evidence. And to ensure proper legal procedure, this was only a request, not a mandatory summons, and there were no grounds. She took the call with remarkable composure, citing poor health as a reason to postpone. The two sides eventually agreed the meeting would take place exactly 1 week later. But just 4 days after that phone call, on February 10th, the incident we described at the start of this video occurred. The 27-year-old man became the final victim, and also the second to die in this chain of events. Piecing together everything that had happened, the task force realized something deeply unsettling. The location, method, and condition of the victims in both deaths were nearly identical, and all matched previous incidents that had not yet been. This could no longer be a random coincidence. Forensic examination subsequently determined that both deceased victims had high concentrations of a drug in the benzodiazepine class in their systems, a central nervous system depressant commonly used to treat anxiety, insomnia, and when taken, the drug can cause rapid drowsiness and loss of motor coordination. This is exactly why both victims lost consciousness almost instantly, with no resistance. But what makes this particular drug especially dangerous is that it must never be combined with alcohol. And in both victims' bodies, police also found significant blood alcohol levels. When sedatives combine with alcohol, they produce a compounding effect, oversuppressing the central nervous system, which can lead to respiratory failure, severe drops in blood pressure, and in the worst case, this is exactly the mechanism that has claimed the lives of numerous famous people throughout history. Through the seemingly harmless combination of alcohol and sedatives, police also found liquor bottles at both scenes, but never found any medication packaging or pill blister packs at all. A sign that someone may have deliberately taken them away before. At this point, the task force was forced to confront a troubling possibility. This could very well be a repeating, calculated pattern of behavior. And if that were true, this woman's level of danger was escalating over time, meaning future victims' chances of survival were growing lower and lower. Without swift intervention, there would very likely be more victims still to come. When reviewing the entire network of contacts among both the lucky survivors and the 2 deceased victims, every lead ultimately converged on a single name, Kim So-yeong, only 20 years old at the time. Before continuing, I want to pause for a moment. By this point, nearly 4 months after the first recorded incident, the task force had exactly 4 things in hand. First, an official report of injury linked to sedatives. Second, camera footage showing the same woman present at both death scenes. Third, forensic results confirming both victims died from the same drug and alcohol mechanism. Fourth, this woman's initial statement, denying any intent to cause harm. They had no weapon, no clear confession, and most importantly, they still hadn't proven this was intentional conduct rather than a tragic accident repeating itself multiple times. If you were in their position, with those 4 things in hand and a suspect still free out there, which direction would you choose? As for the task force at the time, they chose to keep quietly gathering evidence, while dozens of investigators combed through all the security footage along the streets around So-yeong, not far away. A young woman woke up that morning just like any other day. She did her makeup, took a few selfies in flattering light, then posted them to her personal social media with hashtags inviting people to connect and follow. None of the several hundred followers of that account knew whose photos they were looking at. That evening, she continued chatting with a few men she'd just met on a dating app, arranging new meetups for the Her daily life carried on completely normally, with no sign at all that she was, at that very moment, the most closely watched suspect by Seoul police. Alongside the criminal investigation, the string of incidents at motels in Gangbuk also began spreading through the surrounding community. People whispered to each other about young men getting hurt after dates arranged online, making no small number of people, especially young single men, far more wary about accepting meetups with strangers met through. Some motels in the area recorded a noticeable drop in guests in the weeks that followed, as word began to spread even before any official announcement. For the families of the 2 deceased victims, the burden was many times heavier still. They had to face the sudden pain of losing a loved one while also fielding a barrage of questions from the media and curious onlookers online. People who saw the case only as a sensational story, not a real loss. What stirred South Korean public opinion into an even more intense storm came from a direction no one anticipated. Police initially decided not to release the suspect's real image, citing insufficient grounds regarding the severity of the act to bring before. But from just one blurry photo that leaked out, internet users quickly tracked down her personal social media account, where she kept posting carefully curated selfies. A significant portion of the online community, especially on certain forums with large numbers of female users, suddenly rose up in a wave of sympathy for her. There were comments claiming no man could ever refuse a woman who looked like that inviting him to a motel, that her sentence should be reduced because of her face, and some even called for donations to support her. Her follower count shot up from just a few hundred to nearly 10,000 within just a few days. This wave quickly spiraled further, turning into arguments tinged with gender conflict, inflicting yet another layer of harm on the victims' families, this time from complete outsiders to the case. But once her real image from the arrest record was officially released, starkly different from the carefully edited photos online, public opinion instantly reversed course. Many who had spoken up in her defense turned around and admitted they'd been deceived. Follower accounts unfollowed almost immediately, and public attention, only at this point, finally began shifting back to where it needed to be, the criminal act itself, and the people who had paid for it with their lives. Returning to the investigation, once the case file was formally transferred and cooperation began in earnest, police discovered something that sent a chill through the entire task force. While reviewing Kim So-yeong's recent past relationships, they found yet another case. In mid-January 2026, just about 10 days before the 29-year-old victim died, another man, 30 years old, had gone with her to a bar, drunk a hangover relief drink she'd brought along, and fallen unconscious shortly after. While eating and drinking together, this man had personally witnessed her buy a large quantity of hangover drinks at a convenience store, amounting to about 35,000 won, enough to get 14 bottles. Short on cash, she asked him to pay, and he thought little of it, though he did wonder why she needed so many. A criminal psychologist later noted that, given the amount spent on those hangover drinks, there could very well be other victims who never came forward, scattered throughout the gaps between the recorded incidents. Also during this period, police uncovered another notable detail. On February 2nd, 2026, exactly as previously agreed, police called Kim So-yeong to confirm she would come in for questioning on the date they'd settled on a week earlier. But just 3 days before that appointment, it was police themselves who proactively proposed pushing it back further, citing the need for more time to strengthen evidence before, and almost immediately after that request to postpone. On the very evening of February 9th, the second homicide. This raises a major question that remains contentious to this day. Did the decision to postpone the appointment inadvertently create the window in which one more victim, while police later explained the delay was necessary since the suspect at the time still flatly denied every allegation and there wasn't yet sufficient grounds for immediate arrest? That question still leaves a heavy void in the hearts of the victims' families. On the night of February 10th, right after the 27-year-old victim's body was discovered, and once there was enough camera footage to identify the woman who left the scene, police immediately requested. Around 9 that same evening, on a street in Myeodong, Gangbuk District, investigators carried out an emergency arrest of Kim So-yeong. Her phone and residence were thoroughly searched immediately afterward. The months-long silent pursuit had finally come to a close. But the hardest part of the investigation, proving this was intentional murder rather than a repeating string of accidents, had only just begun. Before moving on, I want to pause once more. At this point, police had the suspect in custody, camera footage confirming her presence at every scene, and forensic results showing the same cause of death mechanism in both victims. But they were still missing the single most crucial thing: evidence showing she knew full well her actions could kill someone, rather than simply wanting to put them to sleep. Without that evidence, the most serious charge applicable would only be injury resulting in death, a charge carrying a far lighter sentencing range than murder. If you were the one facing that wall of evidence, where would you look to prove the true intent buried deep inside someone's mind? And the task force found their answer in a place no one expected. 8 days after her arrest, on February 12, 2026, the case file was transferred to the At this stage, since evidence of murderous intent still wasn't solid enough, the charge temporarily applied remained injury resulting. If this situation persisted, Kim So-yeong would very likely face a sentence far lighter than what the consequences of her actions deserve. The task assigned to investigators at this point was clear. They had to prove this was premeditated murder. They proceeded to recover all the data deleted from her phone, and what they found immediately changed the entire course of the case. It was a chat history between Kim So-yeong and a generative AI tool. According to the recovered data, right after the very first incident that sent the Namyangju victim to the hospital in December 2025, it seems his survival wasn't the outcome she had hoped for. Kim So-yeong began asking the AI tool a string of questions, thoroughly researching the side effects of each drug. She asked what would happen if sleeping pills were taken together with alcohol. She asked how much would be needed to become dangerous, and she asked directly whether this could cause someone to die. The tool gave a clear warning about the extreme danger of combining these two substances, explaining it could lead to respiratory failure and cardiac arrest, while also citing real cases of death from the same cause. But Kim So-yeong completely ignored every warning. In the incidents that followed, in January and February 2026, she doubled the dosage compared to the first time, markedly increasing the danger to. This points to a clear fact. She wasn't unaware of the possible consequences. On the contrary, she had actively and thoroughly researched them. And before entering the room with each of the two victims who died, she had proactively stopped by a convenience store to buy additional alcohol and food, an act showing the entire sequence had been calculated and prepared in advance. Not a spontaneous. If it could be established that she was aiming for the victim's death as the final outcome, this could fully qualify as premeditated murder. With this crucial piece of evidence in hand, in a subsequent round of questioning, investigators presented the AI chat history directly to Kim So-yeong. Faced with this undeniable evidence, she finally confessed the true details of how she had carried it out. She recounted that she regularly used dating apps to search for and screen targets, then created opportunities to meet in person. Each time she arranged a meeting, she always prepared 2 bottles of drink in advance, one ordinary, and one pre-mixed with a large amount of finely crushed powder from benzodiazepines. To tell the 2 bottles apart, she marked the caps separately. Through text exchanges with victims before meeting in person, police noticed she consistently steered the conversation toward drinking, telling them she'd once gotten so drunk she overslept, saying she loved the feeling of being drunk, then asking about This psychological groundwork was carried out carefully before every single meet. While eating and drinking together, she would skillfully encourage the victim to drink more, trying to get them into a somewhat. Once the two entered the room, she would offer 2 bottles of drink, hand the drugged one to the victim, then open the other one for herself and drink it normally, leaving the other person with no suspicion. What followed was always the same. Under the compounding effect of alcohol, the drug took effect quickly. The victim gradually slipped into unconsciousness. According to Kim So-yeong's statement to investigators, she always stayed and watched while it happened, until everything. After confirming the other person had stopped breathing, she would begin cleaning up the scene, gathering up to throw off the later investigation. She even used the victim's own credit card to order food delivery, then took all the cash from their wallet. On her way out of the scene, she would even proactively text the victim's phone number, as if they were still alive. After her first attack in January, the message she sent claimed she deliberately booked the room to be with him, even though she was on her period and hadn't brought the supplies she needed, but thanked him anyway for giving her money for a taxi home. After her second attack in February, the message said that seeing him asleep, she didn't want to disturb him and left on her own, reminding him to eat something when he woke up, along with a light complaint, even knowing full well the recipient of these messages would never be able to reply. She still meticulously crafted every line, trying to construct the image of a pleasant, or it was a chilling level of care, serving exactly one purpose, if ever questioned later. She'd already have an answer ready, that when she left, the other person was completely fine, and whatever happened after. So what in this young person's upbringing could produce someone capable of acting so coldly? According to what people who knew her beforehand revealed once the case became public, Kim So-yeong had dropped out of school very early, having repeated a grade in middle school due to insufficient attendance, before withdrawing from high school. According to some former classmates, the real reason behind her leaving school was that she'd been caught stealing from friends multiple times, gradually causing the people around her to cut off contact. After leaving school, she once attended a center in Seoul for dropout teens, which ran supplementary cultural education classes. But during a group activity at that very center in 2024, she was caught stealing belongings from other students, including a wallet and a pair of wireless earbuds, and was in the indictment. Prosecutors described Kim So-yeong as having grown up in a discordant family, having endured both physical and verbal abuse from her father repeatedly throughout her childhood, leaving her without the chance to develop healthy social skills, which gradually shaped a self-centered personality. According to prosecutors' assessment, to satisfy her spending needs and personal financial pressures, she approached one person after another to get them to cover food and lodging expenses. And whenever conflict arose or money was demanded back, she chose to use drugs to eliminate the other person's ability to resist. Regarding Kim So-yeong's psychological assessment, existing records show two differing In early March 2026, Gangbuk police released the results of a psychopathy assessment test using an internationally standardized scale, showing Kim So-yeong scored 25 out of a total 40 points, just barely crossing the threshold of 25 points that professionals in South. This was also one of the reasons prosecutors decided to publicly disclose her identity. But later, on a television program discussing the case, a criminology professor offered a different assessment, stating that according to information she'd obtained from forensic experts, Kim So-yeong's IQ was only just above 70 but under 80, placing her in the lowest 10% compared to the general population, a level considered the borderline of mild intellectual disability. On this matter, two versions exist. The first version, based on the official police test results, holds that this is a textbook case of psychopathy. The second version, based on the criminal psychologist's assessment, raises the question of whether this might be a more complex case, also involving cognitive. Whichever version is accurate, one thing remains undeniably certain. Her actions silently took 2 human lives and pushed 4 others to the very edge between life. What stands out even more, according to what's been recorded, is that there appears to have been no sign of remorse in her. She kept posting selfies to social media as usual, kept searching for new dates. In fact, just about 30 minutes before her arrest, she was still actively messaging another man on a dating app to get acquainted. Police at the time couldn't help but worry that, given how frequently she sought out targets, there could very well be other victims who had never come forward. And their fear turned out to be true. After the case became widely known, 2 more victims proactively contacted police. A 27-year-old man in Seoul, who'd met Kim So-yeong online in October 2025, had fallen into a coma after drinking with her, but was fortunately rushed to the hospital in time. Another man in his 30s, who'd met her through a second-hand goods trading app, had also been asked by her to cover meal expenses during their meetups, and clearly sensed something was off in her eyes and unsettling behavior, though he was fortunate enough never to have drunk a spiked beverage. From the moment of her arrest, the investigation and prosecution of Kim So-yeong's case never stopped, but kept expanding month after month, with the number of confirmed. By March 9, 2026, the Northern Seoul District Prosecutor's Office decided to publicly disclose Kim So-yeong's identity, age, and photograph, a highly controversial decision, since this marked the first time in South Korean judicial history that a female suspect. The following day, March 10th, she was formally indicted on charges of murder, intentional infliction of serious injury, and violation of narcotics control laws, based on allegations that she had used narcotic substances to kill 2 men in their 20s, while also injuring another person. By late April 2026, the ongoing investigation further uncovered 3 additional victims she had injured using the same method, bringing the total number of confirmed victims in the entire case to 6, 2 of whom would never return home again. The first instance trial opened on April 9, 2026 at the Northern Seoul District Court. There, Kim So-yeong's defense attorney acknowledged the fact that she had given drugged drinks to the victims, but firmly denied the charges of premeditated murder and intentional infliction of serious injury, arguing that his client simply believed the other person would fall into a deep sleep. The defense only acknowledged the violation of narcotics control laws. In subsequent hearings held throughout May, June, and July 2026, several surviving victims testified directly in court, most in closed sessions to protect their identities. Their testimony, combined with evidence from the AI chat history, further reinforced the argument that this was deliberate, calculated conduct, not a spontaneous mistake. On August 18, 2026, closing arguments concluded. The prosecution recommended the maximum sentence allowed by law, the death penalty, along with a request for 30 years of electronic monitoring should the death sentence not be handed down. The reasoning given was that the defendant had taken the lives of 2 people utterly incapable of defending themselves, people who had only shown her initial goodwill, while also injuring 4 others, and throughout the entire process from investigation to trial, had shown no genuine remorse. At this hearing, given the chance for final remarks, Kim So-yeong continued to insist she had no idea the victims would die, saying that when she left the room, she could still hear them. Her whole body trembled, her voice breaking repeatedly as she spoke. Right after this hearing, deeming there to be a flight risk, the panel decided to issue an additional detention order against her. The sentencing hearing will be held on August 27, 2026, just days from this video's release. That will be the decisive moment determining whether Kim So-yeong receives the maximum sentence sought by prosecutors, and whether justice is truly served in full for the 2 men who never got the chance to come home again. As for those left behind, the families of the 2 deceased victims are currently pursuing a separate civil lawsuit, demanding that Kim So-yeong and her notably, instead of showing remorse, Kim So-yeong filed a petition with the court, arguing the compensation amount exceeded what she could ever pay in her lifetime, while also requesting a reduction in accrued interest, and objecting to her. For the families of the deceased, this was a wound cut open once again, as even after the full truth had come to light, the person responsible for all of it had never once offered them a genuine apology. Looking back at this entire case, there are 3 things I think we should carry with us as we close today's video. First, no difficult life circumstance, whether a discordant family or financial hardship, can ever justify taking another person's life. Responsibility for that act, in the end, always belongs to the one who carried it out. Second, this case reveals something worth reflecting on regarding AI tools becoming ever more common in daily life. They can issue clear and accurate warnings, but cannot stop someone already determined to act wrongly. And conversely, that very search history became undeniable evidence of guilt. Technology itself carries no fault, but it is also not a place to hide a person's true intentions. Third, for anyone seeking new relationships through social media or dating apps, always maintain a certain degree of caution, especially when the other person keeps proactively pouring drinks for you during early meetings in private. enclosed space. A little caution can sometimes be exactly the line between safety and danger. Throughout this video, you may have noticed something different from many of the cases we've explored together compared to seasoned criminals who always try to erase every trace. Almost every action Kim So-yeong took unintentionally became a signpost guiding the very investigation aimed at her. In the light of digital data, no one is truly invisible. Every time she went to a hospital for a prescription, every fake message sent after leaving a scene, every question posed to an AI tool, all of it silently recorded traces of the criminal act itself. Those clumsy attempts at deception, once placed before forensic experts already holding precise data on the time of death, proved not just useless, but became, on the contrary, the sharpest evidence that she fully understood the victim's abnormal state, yet deliberately left anyway to shed responsibility, turning to AI as a supporting tool. Ironically, only made her calculated naivety all the more apparent. The scene of a crime can be cleaned up, but the footprints left in digital space can almost never be fully erased. Technology itself carries no guilt, but in the end, no advanced algorithm can ever fully calculate a heart that has gone completely cold. As for further developments in this case, especially the outcome of the upcoming sentencing hearing on August 27th, I'll continue following it and update you all in another video. That's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.